All right.
We're ready now.
I'm sorry, sir.
We just had to get going live.
I can't repeat. I practiced that for freaking weeks.
Got a schedule to meet here.
Yeah,
We're good to go.
We're already 3 minutes.
We're good now. Okay, thank you very much. All right, calling to order the July meeting of the August Finance Committee of Newtown Township, ergo known as Newtown Square. Quick roll call, Mr. Nabholz.
Here.
Mr. Skoukis.
Here.
Ms. Pacell.
Here.
Mr. Fisher.
Here.
All right, we got a full quorum. Let's please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. And pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, may I have a motion, please, to consider approving the agenda for this meeting?
We'll move.
Second.
Any comment? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion approved by a vote of 5-0. Nobody in the audience, anybody online for a public comment? Awesome. May I have a motion, please, to consider approving the minutes from the June 15, 2022 meeting?
We'll move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, vote of 5-0, approving the minutes from the previous meeting. Presentations, the esteemed Mr. Lafayette. I assume it's the esteemed Mr. Lafayette.
I like it.
Yeah, okay. No, I assume it's you who's presenting, not the esteemed. The esteemed part is fairly well known at this point.
Yeah, sure. So what we wanted to kind of do with the committee today was go over our proposed capital budget. We're not going to go into a lot of detail in it. It's a fairly lengthy presentation. This year, we're actually going to do things a bit differently. We're going to present the capital as well as the operating at the same time. Our operating budget is usually our long presentation. If anybody looked through the slides, this one's about 30-something slides.
It's the short
long.
one.
Plus our operating, it might make for a lengthy presentation. So we're gonna try to kind of consolidate them, keep everybody's attention, but we just wanted to go over some details with the committee before it's presented to the Board of Supervisors. So I would like to start out by saying this is, I guess, our first budget presentation to this committee. And I would like to start out, I believe Steve mentioned it at the last meeting, the finance team here won our third straight Distinguished Budget Award for 2022. I believe that we're going to do a formal presentation at the next meeting, make a big hoorah about it, but it's something that we're really proud of
That's
here,
great.
and there's a lot of work. So I just wanted to start out the budget talk with a little pat on the back for myself and the finance team, I guess.
That's great.
Yes, well deserved.
So moving on to the capital presentation, one of the things that we really wanted to do at first was go over some previous year's history. So we start out with our 21 capital purchases, just to highlight a few. The main one that you'll see is about $1.1 million for the fire truck and some additional fire equipment, the leaf machine. But overall, these are all our capital purchases for the 2021 year. And then we move on to the 2022 capital budget. We chose to do the budget here versus purchases because the 2022 fiscal year isn't over yet. Some of these projects may not happen and may get pushed over, but we want to show everything that we budgeted. As you can see, $4.4 million in capital purchases.
Real quick question. What can you, this is going to sound so simplistic, but what is your definition of what goes into capital?
Good question. So our definition of capital we'll use is anything over $5,000 with a useful life of more than 1 year. Different municipalities may use different thresholds, but that's what we found that works here. Anything smaller, we feel like we get too granular. Anything bigger, we feel like we miss some things that we need to capitalize. So $5,000 for the useful life of 1 year is what we use.
And those are depreciated over the useful life then?
That is correct. yeah.
That's correct.
Yep.
I will say, like some items that we buy in quantity, so like we'll buy 8 laptops or 8 computers, I shouldn't say laptops, but 8 computers in the year. We will capitalize that, even though each individual item wasn't 5,000, but the bulk purchase was 5,000, if that makes sense. So that's just kind of how we look at that. So it's not necessarily an individual item, but it is what that purchase is within the year of what we're doing.
Now, the question I have is that not all of these items are capitalized, but they're in the capital budget. For example, I assume the planning consultant is not a capitalized item.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yes.
And the way the way it's capital, it's really capital / potentially one-time expenses that wouldn't be a part of your ongoing every year operating
Got it.
expense.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And most likely, these are dollars that we may not be paying out of the general fund budget. We would be paying out of the capital budget.
Thank you.
So as I touched on, these are our 2022 capital budget items. As you can see, a pretty hefty price tag of $4.4 million.
Can we stay with that for just a second, Rich? The one that I noticed that seems to be new is the sidewalks. What is that about?
So these sidewalks are the sidewalks that are going to go down Ellis Ave. A big portion of it's covered by a grant,
Okay.
but it's municipal sidewalks as well as the sidewalk that's going to go down Ellis. And Steve may have some
Yeah,
more
so-
details on that.
So we own the sidewalk that goes up the
Right.
front hill here. We also own, we're responsible for the sidewalk that goes along Stony Brook Boulevard from campus or from Bishop Hollow
Oh, that far?
to that first resident. So the one, it basically runs along, there's a piece of property that kind of butts up right against Hunter's Run that the township owns. And it's a sliver that's probably not, I say sliver because I don't think it's 20 feet, 30 feet wide at the most. And it kind of goes back. And because we own that, we own the sidewalk. And so we're looking at we're putting in the sidewalk coming down Ellis. And then when we do that, as part of that project, hopefully to get economy of scale, is to replace all the sidewalks just to bring them up to what they need to be.
Got it. So this is township property.
It is.
Yes.
It is. Other than Ellis Avenue.
Okay,
Ellis Avenue would be new sidewalks within the community.
got it.
And you mentioned, Rich, that there's a source of funding
Yes.
for this? Okay.
So 2 years ago, we went out for a grant what we wanted to do was actually complete a loop from here down to Drexel Lodge, back through Drexel Lodge, back up, and then back around. So you would have this huge loop. It would do a great job of connecting really basically everything from Terraza this way, because there's sidewalks all along Troop Farm and Stony Brook. And then we would have had a trail / sidewalk down Campus Boulevard. And then connecting all of this, well, we got, that was like a $5 million ask. We got 650,000. So we focused on what we thought would be the biggest win. And the biggest win would be connecting Westchester Pike back to here. Because we have a lot of problems where people are trying to walk along Ellis Avenue and people travel a little too fast.
Yeah, we
And
noticed
so by
the speed
putting the
tables there,
sidewalk
yeah.
in, we create that walkability.
Yeah.
And we have the bike lane along campus that people do use to walk. So we felt like we could take this in stages, but this would be the biggest win initially. BPG / Equus will be, as part of the widening of Westchester Pike, we'll be taking the sidewalk from where Uno Pizza, where it ends, and connecting it to that spot right up here where the Goddard School is. So they will be running that whole piece will also have sidewalk. So when we get all of that done, it'll be a pretty nice completion. We won't quite be all the way to Drexel Lodge, but that'll be our next funding request.
Are we going to add a shuttle bus from Westchester Pike to the top of Campus Boulevard?
Trolley.
So you don't have to walk up that hill? Or maybe a rope tow?
What's up with the paper mill roof, house roof, 125,000? Is that gold shingles?
So since it's a historic site, I believe there's a cedar plank roof needs to go on, a lot more expensive than a normal roof.
And we own that?
Yes.
And I take it all the revenue will offset that from the visitors to Paper Mill?
We do, we have been given, I consider it a substantial gift, $40,000.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's probably a lot of grants for the historical sites.
For that roof, we received $40,000 from one of the developers in town.
Oh, so the roof will be 85,000?
Yeah, this is gross.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the expense, this shows the full expense,
Gotcha.
doesn't necessarily show the offset of revenue.
Could you talk about the Greer Park project in terms of total scope and whether or not there's funding sources for that as well?
So the Greer Park project, the total scope is about $5 million. It's changing the pond. And I say changing it, it's actually reducing the size. Allowing still for some fishing. There's supposed to be a pier. Redoing the stream bank so that the stream runs through the property versus into the pond. The pond will actually be an offset. And then there'll be all new playground, restoring of the wetlands that are in the back. There'll be a trail, multiple pieces of trail that go through the park. And I also believe that there in long term, there's the potential for restrooms.
What's the total size of the property? You know?
Is it 6 acres?
I
5
don't know
acres?
that one off the top of my head.
It's 5 or 6 acres. It's deceivingly big because it's very long.
And funding, is there any?
We
available
have,
source?
right now, we have, I think, about $400,000 worth of funding, 450, something like that, towards that project, and we should be getting started on it hopefully this year. The engineer's working on design right now. I say, the engineering will get started. We won't go out to bid until next year.
Thank you.
So if everybody's good with the 2022 capital budget, we'll move on.
Well, can I do one more? I'm sorry. What about the gable? Because the gable field, I just noticed that was a little higher too.
The Gable Field, yeah, that's a high number. So Gable Field is the field that's behind us. It's the turf field, the artificial turf field. The artificial turf needs to be replaced.
Okay.
That's incredibly expensive. The good news is the system underneath of it's still okay, but the turf itself needs to be replaced. We were supposed to do that this year. To be honest with you, we're not going to. Some of the ball teams came in and replaced home plate, first, second, and third bases. We didn't, I mean, they spent like probably $25,000, $30,000 doing that. We didn't think it was wise to turn around and tear that out the same year that they put it in. And we weren't 100% sure we were ready to do that. I mean, that's a big number. We've kind of put that on hold until we can get to the spot that makes sense based on what they just spent money on doing.
Got it.
So I'll ask the truly obnoxious question from a traditionalist. Why isn't that field grass?
So why it wasn't originally grass,
Or even now converting it over?
why wasn't it converted back to
Yeah.
grass? You know, we did look at that. To convert it back to grass is actually more expensive than it is to returf it.
But it's a one-time.
But we could argue it's a one-time, but grass is much more, there's much more maintenance on a grass field if we're gonna keep it looking. like that. And so the determination was that it was, at this point, it was a kind of like a draw of whether you do that or whether you take it back to grass. And the sports teams like it to be this. It's real versatile this way. Soccer uses it, lacrosse uses it, field hockey uses it. And they would be really hard on the turf if we were to, take it back to a grass turf to try to keep it pristine. It would be very difficult.
Thank you.
We did look at it. It's because we thought the same thing.
Yeah, and I just think that artificial turf is fascist, but that's just.
I understand. It's.
And I'm not talking about the turf on your front lawn.
No, I put it in the grass.
Family room. All right, Rich.
So any other questions on 2022 capital items? So if not, we'll move into our rating system. One of the cool things that we've been doing over the past couple of years is we have this rating system. Starts with A, which is a safety issue, and goes all the way down to D, which is a capital suggestion not ready to implement, kind of just putting it on the board's radar. Something that then within each A, B, C, D, we pretty much put all the department heads together and make them arm wrestle about who gets A1, A2, A3, and that's kind of how we prioritize our capital. One thing that's cool is we've been doing this for, I want to say, the past 5 years. And just recently I was watching a GFOA training on capital items, and they used something extremely similar to this. So not only, it may have been a best practice for longer than that, but it was the first I've heard of it, and we've been doing it before that. So again, I think we're budgeting wisely here. So moving on to our first 2023 capital item, it's the administrative department. One of the things that we're going to ask for is a vehicle. And Steve, you can just keep going.
One of the trolleys.
Yeah. Not that quick. So one of the things we're going to ask for is an administration vehicle for $45,000. We're not currently sure which type of vehicle it is, but vehicles, we put wear and tear on them. They're usually recycled police cars. So we're proposing purchasing a new administrative vehicle. The second thing for administration would be document scanning. One of the things that we're trying to do here is go paperless. So this would actually be phase 2. Phase 1 is in this year's budget. If phase 1 doesn't get completed this year, we'll move phase 1 into the next year's budget and so on. But one of the goals that we have is to become paperless. So this is an item moving forward.
And it probably should be rated C, because I think it was D originally when we put it in, that we weren't quite ready. But now that we started it this year, it should be rated C.
So we'll get that upgraded to C.
I will say that we'll be moving to most of our stuff being electronic. They have the Pennsylvania guidelines for document destruction have not totally changed yet. So there are some documents that we will keep in paper. So as much as we want to be paperless, we won't be there because there are some requirements still. But what our goal is to have everything scanned and electronic. It will allow us to get to them much faster, because about a third to half of our documents are stored not off site, but out of the building. And so, when somebody has to go and retrieve that, it's usually about 30 minutes. If we could get that down to less than a minute to be able to retrieve it, because it was in an electronic system. I mean, I start adding up the savings. It's not going to take long to pay for what it's going to cost us to get that done. Go ahead.
So one of the things we also like to show the supervisors are new items versus replacement items, just to show them that all these items aren't new. We're replacing items to keep the level of service. So at the end of the day, admin is asking for $62,000 in new items and $45,000 in replacement items. Moving on to codes, one of the things that the codes is going to ask for is a codes vehicle, very similar to the admin vehicle. It's just experiencing wear and tear. They're usually recycled cars, so we are going to ask for another one.
Hey, Rich. So with that type of thing, have we considered personal vehicles and reimbursement for miles?
We have, and particularly the codes area, they're incredibly hard on a vehicle, just the getting in and out there. Andy's often going to a site that's full of mud and, doing that. And, that's really hard to ask somebody to do to their personal vehicle day in and day out. And so, and it's usually why they end up with the leftover police cars, in that way is that, it's just kind of that thing. But we've been looking at two things. One is sustainability, and if we could go to something that's potentially, electric or something along those lines, looking at also something that may be more specific to what he's doing versus, what that is. And so we're looking at those kind of things. The other challenge that we have is that one of our employees that we have is actually very tall. And
It's not me.
And he's only an inch taller than I am, but his body is tall. He's got very short legs and very tall body. He can't fit in a couple of the cars that we have. So we're having to really look at what we need to do there so that that he doesn't drive like this down the road. So,
That's why I keep my sunroof open year round.
is that why? Okay.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier.
Okay, well, I'll look at the sunroof to solve that
Or
problem.
convertible helps too.
Oh, convertible, I'm sure you would appreciate that.
These are things that I've, learned over the years.
Okay, good.
Seems like a good application for either electric or hybrid.
Yeah,
Hybrid would be
we are looking at either one. Yeah,
And then-
administration, we're looking more probably, a hybrid coach, we're looking at possibly electric.
So that is the only ask for codes in 2023 at this point in time. It's a replacement cost of $45,000. So moving on to police, the police are asking for two things. One is our, I'll call it police vehicle replacement program. And I know John had some questions on the replacement programs last meeting, so we're gonna touch on all those this one. One of them is our vehicle replacement program for the police cars. We currently budget 2 police cars every single year. This year, there's $106,000 in the budget. We amped it up a little bit just for inflation costs and things. I'm not even sure if that is the correct amount, but we'll adjust it as we go.
Did they buy in the vehicles this year? Did they actually do
We're
the
trying
replacement or
to.
they defer?
We're trying to, they can't even get them.
Okay.
They put in to purchase new cars in, I think, December of last year, once we approved the budget from the dealerships. And as of last week, when I talked to the chief, there is still nothing even on the horizon. There's a chip that's not being produced or whatever. And so the cars are sitting, waiting for that chip. And as soon as they come in, the chips will be put in. I said, so in other words, something that's probably not much bigger than my palm of my hand at the biggest, probably even smaller, is what everything's waiting on. And he said, yes. So it's, yeah. So in fact, we can't even get the parts to go inside. We bought a new police car a year and a half ago or a year ago that I was using with the idea that we would use it in administration and then give it to the police, because when the police get done, it's pretty well shot. I can't even get the equipment that goes inside it right now to give it to them, to give me a car out of their fleet. So we're trying. It's just supply chain issues are really bad with that stuff right now.
So like I touched on, we're going to continue with our replacement of 2 police vehicles every year. And when they come out of service, try to recycle them the best that we possibly can or sell the asset. The other item that the police are asking for, it's rated a D1 because they're not quite ready to implement it yet, but they really want it on the horizon. It also came out of our public meeting. Some of the residents showed interest in it, is the body cameras. So it's a one-time capital purchase of approximately $46,000 to purchase the camera and equipment, servers, things along those. The actual ongoing cost is about $5,500 a year to store the data. A lot of the capital may be covered with grants. I've talked to some other townships and they've gotten grants for it, but the operating cost is the long time cost that you're always going to incur. So at the end of the day, the police are asking for $46,000 in new items and 111 in replacement items, which represents the vehicles. So moving on to Public Works. Public Works has a variety of projects, and we're going to briefly touch on any of them. For time purposes, we're going to move kind of quickly, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. So the first one is going to be crosswalks. There's some crosswalks that are being proposed on campus in Goshen. They're the nice crosswalks with the lights and all that stuff. They're approximately $16,000 each.
These are mid-block crossings, just so everybody understands. That's one of the reasons why they're so expensive. It's not as simple as just going and painting paint on the ground. It's actually, we're gonna have to put up signage and all kinds of stuff to make
Flashing light.
flashing lights.
So they're approximately $16,000 each, and there's 3 being proposed to get put in. In an effort to continue to reduce speeding throughout the township, we're proposing more permanent speed humps. We have the temporary ones out on Ellis and I believe Sawmill at the moment. Once we get the test results back from them, that might be an area that would be.
I have to tell you, the ones on Sawmill, you get so many people throwing the one finger salute, so it's clearly working.
Well, can you make the one on Alice a little higher? Because, and I have no problem with it, but like this is an aside, you can't even go to speed limit over those speed humps. It's great. It does its job. You have to stop because it's so not diminutive. Does its job.
Yeah, so that we're going to propose putting some permanent speed humps in to complement our temporary speed humps / tables. Something else that we are aware that needs to get permanently repaired is the Valley Fourth Road Bridge. We had some damage to it. I believe it was in 2022, if not late 2021. There may possibly be some grants out there for this as well. We're currently looking into it, but we do need to come up with a permanent solution for the Valley Forge Road Bridge. St. Albans Circle, again, moving with the traffic control. We're proposing putting in a traffic island there for approximately $26,000. The library patio, this was actually budgeted in 2020, I believe, 2020, and then there was a capital purchase freeze in 2020 because of COVID and everything like that. We never got around to doing it. So we're just proposing moving that from the 2020 budget into the 2023 budget because that has not been done yet.
On this one, I think you just might make a note. I'm sure they'll look at it. Because of the amount of rainfall that has permeated that patio over the last 20 years, I have to believe the under infrastructure.
It's all a part of that project.
Okay.
It's looking at all that, redoing all the, I think we got in the budget this year to redo all the gutters.
Yes.
And then come back and do that properly.
So I have to believe the underground will double what the visually what you can see.
Yep. We're looking at a pretty big project there and trying to also maintain, or at least there's a fair number of bricks out there that
Compromised, right?
that have names on them, and also maintain those bricks as part of what we're doing. So it's a combination of trying to make it a little bit more, to make it more of a permanent solution, good drainage, and all of those things.
Right.
So our next proposed item is a new replacement program that we're going to propose. It's the LED replacement program. Back in 2018, I believe, timeframe, we went through the township and replaced all the streetlights with LEDs. It was covered by a guaranteed energy savings program, but we're aware that these are, since they were all installed at the same time, they're probably roughly all going to go bad at the same time.
Right.
This is putting $20,000 a year aside, knowing that this in the future is going to need to be replaced. So when the time comes, the cash is at hand and we can just continue the program. Very similarly, on the next slide, it's the Public Works Vehicle and Replacement Program. We started this 3 years ago with $25,000. We're We're going to continue to add $25,000 until we get to the $250,000 mark, which is where we believe we need to be to replace the public works vehicles and equipment on an ongoing basis, very similar like we talked about with the police cars. Continuing on with another replacement program is our road program. We started this many years ago at this point. It seems like 2016 with $50,000. We've added $50,000 to it every single year. We're proposing adding another $50,000 to bring us to $400,000. This accompanied with the liquid fuels money that we get every year is, we believe we would have enough to do a half decent sized road program every year or a pretty big road program every year moving forward, every other year, to help us replace the roads on an ongoing basis.
Maybe it's me, but when I drive around, it seems like I see more and more roads that are in really bad shape in town. I don't know whether the engineer is monitoring.
We
what's
are,
going on.
we did 11 miles of roadway in 2021. No, 2020.
Yep.
We did 11 miles of roadway. And so we budget to do 2 a year. And so right now we're focusing on getting the debt paid off that we borrowed to do those 11 miles.
Catch up, right.
Part of the challenge was the roads were well past where they needed to be when we started this. So we're playing catch up. In the last about 8 years, 9 years, we've done well over half of the township. I think we're at almost 30 miles of roadway.
Yeah.
Is that we've paved out of the 52. So we're paving more quickly than what we really want to be because we're trying to get caught up. With the goal that every 25 years a road would be repaved or resurfaced or whatever would need to be done. And so that's our goal. We're looking at a couple stopgap measures on bad roads right now. We know the really bad ones. And then, we want to keep going and get them.
Bryn Mawr Avenue ours or? is it
Bryn
the
Mawr
same?
Avenue is state road. And so that actually
That one's
is,
horrific.
that one's terrible. It's on the list to get done in 2022. They're supposed to be doing Bryn Mawr Avenue this summer, early fall.
How much does it cost us to do? Sorry. How much does it cost us to do a road?
So
I mean, 1
it-
mile, I'm sorry.
Like it's, yeah, so again, 1 mile of Earl's Lane is probably more expensive than 1 mile of park out here, just because the width and those kind of things. But we estimate that it's roughly about $400,000 to do a mile. And the goal is to do 2. We get roughly $400,000 from liquid fuels, and we're putting aside $400,000 of our own so that we can do 2 miles a year of our 52 miles, trying to stay up on top of it so that every 25 years we're redoing those roads. And 25 years is what we believe is the life expectancy of a road before it's really needs to be done fully over. And so hopefully we'll get into the spot that we'll get into that routine going forward. And that's the goal. And we're just trying to get caught up because for years we just patched, we didn't really do full paving. What they did, a lot of what they call slurry seal. They would just come in, put down, tar and then come back with some gravel on, chipped gravel on top. And that's how they did a road. We're actually doing true repairs, bringing it back up, putting a full wearing course on. And we believe it'll last much longer doing that.
Thank you.
So moving on to the road program, another thing came from our public budget workshops was additional leaf collection. As you can see, it's about $460,000 in capital purchase equipment, but the real overall expense is the ongoing expense is about $55,000 a year for that we would have to add to our general fund, which is That comes from mostly comes from our tax revenue instead of our fund balance. So it'd be about $55,000 a year plus the $460,000 in capital purchases to have the trucks go around. I believe it would be one more time. So overall, Public Works is looking about $654,000 in new capital items and about 1.4 million in replacement costs, with an additional $55,000 added to the operating if the supervisors would choose to move to additional leaf collection days. Moving on to parks, there's about 5 things that are requested at the parks at this point in time. The first is the Drexel Lodge sewer hookup. This is going to be required once sewer is brought to that area and able to take flow. Bathrooms are currently on septic, and they need to be connected to public sewer. The next thing is the Drexel Lodge grant match. We received a $100,000 grant in 2022, I believe. Yes, 2022. We just got it. It's for a new gazebo, some redecking on the pedestrian bridge, but the township needs a $15,000 match. So you'll see the overall cost is $115,000, but the township received a $100,000 grant for that. Just know that. The next thing is the key and camera system at the parks. Currently, the officers and or Public Works have to go and lock the bathrooms up at night. So one of the things we want to do is bring internet to our parks, be able to put up some cameras and an automatic key system that we can control everything from this building. So we're not having officers go out there and Public Works on a daily basis. The next, I believe Lisa already touched on this, is the replacement of the turf field. Steve also stated we don't believe we're going to get to it this year because of some repairs that were already done to it. So we're just going to move this from the 2022 capital to the 2023 capital. And the next thing also came out of the public budget workshop, as well as a suggestion from our Public Works team, is to start a replacement playground equipment replacement program, very similar to the Public Works and road program. We want to put about $25,000 a year away, knowing that playground equipment has a useful life. Once we hit that number, we'll be able just to replace the playground equipment as we go.
Most of our playground equipment's actually past its useful life, to be real honest.
Liabilities.
And if it starts becoming a liability issue, we've had to take some playground equipment out because of that. So this puts us in a place to have something to be able to go back and put it in place.
Why would it be an A then?
It's not essential.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah, understandable, but still.
we could argue that it's safety.
Yeah.
Where we are right now, what we've taken out, we've actually already had money in the bank. We've saved money for over several years to be able to replace. So
Yeah.
that was because that was a safety issue. This, we're saying, should be just part of our ongoing business and being
Like road,
Yes.
police
kind of like the
vehicles.
road and those.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's the reason.
Okay.
Some of these are subjective. You
It's
have to
arguable,
kind
yeah.
of, you could argue either way. Obviously, when the playground gets old and somebody can get hurt on it, it's a safety issue. And at that point, it would become an A, but what we're doing here is really kind of being proactive so that it never gets to that point.
Thank you.
So overall in the parks, we're looking at greater than $30,000 in new items, because we don't have an exact number for the keys and bringing internet to the park at the moment, but it's over $30,000 in new items and about $615,000 in replacement items. Last but not least, our fire equipment program. This is going to be a new replacement program as well. As I believe I touched on at the beginning of this presentation, we recently purchased the fire truck. Fire company has another truck that I believe needs to be replaced within the next couple of years. This is a program that we want to start at $25,000, $50,000 to every year, so that when our fire truck, our current fire truck, as well as new fire trucks go, we have the funds available to just start replacing them, just like we do with the roads and the vehicle replacement programs.
All these monies that we're putting aside for future uses, we don't touch those for anything else, right? We
No.
don't,
Whatever they get set aside for, they get designated for that, I'm sorry. They get, whatever they get set aside for, they become designated for that purpose. And so that way, we have the funds as we need them to go do what we need to do.
And we also assign or commit them at the end of every year. So it takes, we do it at a board meeting, so it takes formal board action for us to actually use those funds for something else.
What are the things that may be helpful in trying to frame this without putting more work on you? Is, even though I am, or I'm suggesting, we have the gross expenditure prioritized. And then you have the possibility either of funding from third-party sources or actual expenditures, monies that have came in towards that is being held in reserve. So one of the things that could be possibly helpful for the supervisors is to understand what that differential is. Gross is 1,000. We've got $340,000 in the bank. So we know what the gap is in terms of those particular areas.
Per particular project, we do that as we present. You know, we talk about that, you know, for example, the project over at Drexel Lodge, we talk about the fact that we have $100,000 grant. We have a $15,000 match. The gross is 115.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And then overlaying it with how, you know, how is it rated? Is it rated D or is it rated A? That type of thing. So
Yeah.
you can kind of like then prioritize.
Sure.
So you know, okay, we're gonna do A and B.
Yeah.
I have to do A and B. What is the total shortfall that we
Sure.
have to fund out of general funds?
And the real goal, when we do these replacement program pieces, I mean, to be honest with you, there shouldn't be large, huge funds being built up. You would think that there would, but I mean, the goal, if we set aside $400,000 a year for road replacement, and we're doing a project every other year, because that's what our goal is to do it every other year, just to get the best.
Nice.
It's typically a better deal to go out on the
Price.
bid if you do a larger project. So if we do it every other year, you'll only ever have 400,000 sitting 1 year. But the idea being, instead of having 800,000 in the budget in 2024 for a road program, you have 400 each year, and then you're
Smoothing.
you know, you're just prepared. And so even like this fire equipment, I mean, that'll probably be a little different in that those trucks are just so stinking expensive when you go to buy them. You'll probably have a little bit more money building up in those. But if we're replacing a truck, if we do it right, we'll be replacing a truck kind of in the middle of like their life, let's say that a fire truck's life expectancy is 15 years. We'd be replacing one, and then 7.5 years later, we're replacing number 2. And so you're not really, even though we're building for both trucks, we're really knowing we're going to spend it at this point, and then you're going to start again for the next truck, kind of thing, is how we're doing.
Do we talk about a secondary market for those things? For fire trucks?
There is a secondary market.
Yeah.
Particularly in rural areas. The reason why the minute that truck passes a certain useful life on our end, if we don't replace it, it has a direct impact on our residents in regards to what their homeowners insurance will be, because of the level of fire service that we have in town. And so we're very particular about trying to keep our trucks right to that 15-year mark, because if it doesn't meet the insurance qualifications, then it impacts our residents in their yearly fee that they pay for that. So even though the truck may leave us and you think it's in good shape, and for example, the current old fire truck, the ladder. I think they finally have sold it
Yeah,
now, but
just sold it.
they just sold it. But it was leased out to another municipality that lost one in a fire. And so they were leasing it back from the fire company to do that. And so, but going forward, the idea is that we will stay current on ours and not
That
not
makes
be in
sense.
that position.
How many fire trucks do we own?
Right now, we own one,
You were referring to two, though. You said.
but yes, we own one. There's two in the firehouse that run regularly. We're looking to buy the replacement for the one that's in the firehouse right now.
So you talk about the difference between owning and leasing?
The fire company owns the second one.
Currently, the fire company had purchased the
Oh, so the
first ladder
township
truck.
owned one's the fire company owns the other one.
Correct.
So this is a question I had when I saw this come up. I know that's a quasi-governmental entity.
It is.
Why does the township buy their equipment when they're out raising all this money?
Well, first of all, what they're raising doesn't cover all their expenses. That's number one. Number two, in 19. Maybe it was even year 2000, either 2000 or 1990. I can't remember the exact date. There were 385,000 volunteer firemen. In last year, there were 34,000 volunteer firemen across the state of Pennsylvania. That's a significant decline in the number of volunteer fire companies. A lot of municipalities have had to go into the business of having paid fire departments. We made a decision as a board, after meeting with them and talking with them, that we would start buying fire trucks for the fire company for two reasons. One, it makes their fundraising a little less onerous, and it allows the fire guys to do it requires, I think, is it 180 hours of training?
Yeah,
It's
yes.
like 180 hours of training that they have to do before they can even ride on the fire truck to go out. So that's a pretty significant commitment to a volunteer. So, if we're asking them to do that and to fundraise, there's some issues that come into that. So we made the decision to do that. Secondly, if the volunteer fire company closes, we're not looking at a township of having to figure out how to go buy fire equipment. We own the fire equipment. Then it's just a matter of we have to go staff it. And so it's moving us into a position of what I think ultimately is going to happen someday, is that volunteer fire companies, volunteerism isn't what it used to be. And we're seeing that in a lot of areas. And this is just preparing us. So it does two things. It allows the fire company to really focus on fighting fires and doing what that service is. And the longer that we can do that, it's incredibly much cheaper for us to buy fire equipment than it is to pay firefighters. If you take a look at our police budget and you take anywhere from 80 to 100% of that police budget, that's what it would cost us to have a full-time volunteer or full-time paid fire staff. It's roughly about $3.5 to $4 million is what the police budget is. I look at that and I say, buying $1 million fire truck every 15 years, probably a good investment if we can keep them being volunteer, in that way. And we then own the equipment if there's ever an issue, and we take care of it. We insure it anyhow, so it just makes it ours.
But buying the equipment, it hastens the change from a volunteer to a township-based fire department, because as it is now, or before we owned the equipment, people didn't give what they probably should have to the fire department because they assumed that was a paid service. But now, once you get into buying the equipment, you're telling people, yeah, we own the equipment, but what we need you to volunteer money for is to pay for the labor as such, which people would be less inclined to do, knowing that that some of their tax money's already gone to the fire department. So their fundraising, I expect, might drop once people realize that we're buying all the equipment, which will hasten the transfer.
That's why almost every time you hear me talk about it, I also talk about the fact that if they're not volunteer, it would cost us about $3.5 million, which would mean right today, if I remember right, it's about a 75% increase in our taxes.
Well, I don't dispute the fact. It's the,
I
I think it's
understand.
the mentality of
But that's
getting,
why-
getting the envelope in the mail, and most people don't know that it's, anyway. My
But
point
I
is, I
think
think most
that's-
people that get the envelope now will say, wait a minute, we own the trucks. So that why it's going to taxes.
Well, I think that's all the more reason that when we talk about it, and that's why I communicated to you, that's why I communicated to the board. Hopefully, when we talk about it out with our neighbors, we're saying, this is what the real cost is. And yes, the township's buying the equipment to help to make sure that that's there. But, you know, they're still paying for a firehouse. They're still paying for the hoses. They're still paying for the packs on their back. They're still paying for the uniforms. They're still, you know, I can give you the list that they're still paying for. We're just giving them the wheels to make sure they get to where they're going.
It wouldn't hurt to put that in a newsletter at some
Yeah.
point. That
It's another
says,
communications problem.
yeah, I mean,
We
it
can look
says
at
to
that.
people, not just,
No.
yeah, I mean, something in.
Steve, don't they pay for 3 paid firefighters during the day?
3 or 4.
Yeah. They're paying.
We don't
The
want to
day
get into
staff.
that. Yeah, I mean, they're paying that, and we don't want to get into that business if we can help it. You know, as much as possible, let them do that on their end.
I'm guessing most of the residents don't even know the situation, and it would be real easy if we didn't own any equipment, that we could put something out that says, look, people, the fire department is its own entity, you need to fund it with volunteer money and do that. But now when it's quietly, and we own some of it, we need to explain that and say, look, even though we own some of it, there's still a huge shortfall for them. And we can't just expect them to do that, sort of communicating. It's got to come from the township, because
Gotcha.
the township is the one that's going to be, you know, saddled with having to fund the entire department.
I'm making note here. Add that to what we do.
Yeah, so that kind of concludes the presentation. I believe the last slide is just to break it down between, these are our new items. We're asking for about $760,000 in new items versus our replacement items of about 2.2 million. In addition to the capital, or if everything gets in the budget, you're adding about $60,000 to our general fund budget as well, just for the ongoing costs.
I take it by that number, you don't have to add any FTEs to this. If you only have 60,000 annual operating costs incremental, it's not like you need more people to operate the new capital programs.
There is, when we look at the leaf collection, there is, but we would do that through a third party.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's contract labor.
Yep.
I'm sorry. On the replacement items, do you think there's value in breaking out the total for the items that you're planning, the police replacement, all these paying for the future? All the items that you're setting aside money for today to spend tomorrow. Because from my perspective, this is good government. You guys aren't waiting to like you just said, I don't need $800,000 today because I've set aside $25,000 a year to show what portion of that $3 million is this set aside for tomorrow.
You're saying new items, replacement items, future
Future items.
replacement
I
program
may be
items?
wrong. Since you've been doing this, I think there was one year that they didn't set some money aside for police cars because
Actually, 2.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're planning, we're paying today, so we don't have to pay tomorrow. And I think there might be value in showing that, we're working to.
I think that there is a good point that you're talking about, and one of those things that we try to do is, so like the last 4 items.
I believe I tried- Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe I tried to break them out that way.
The last
Just
4
not-
items, they're actually in the operating budget.
Mhm.
So the whole idea, when we do these replacement programs, we add that money to the operating
Right.
budget so that every year we went from literally zero when we started doing this, to now we're asking for roughly 525,000 that we're putting towards capital, knowing that ultimately, I just adding that up as we go, knowing that ultimately we need to be a number closer to 1 million. Just in capital out of our operating budget every year so that we stay on top of what we're doing.
Well, maybe that number, when you present your operating budget, here's my $11 million operating budget. 1 million of this is for tomorrow,
Yeah.
so we don't have this,
Yep, I think that's great.
Well, and so, when some of it's actually, just so that it's clear, it is tomorrow, but some of it's actually today as well. So.
Oh, yeah, right. Some of it's being spent today out of the capital, but it's being funded annually out of the operating.
Correct. Because like police cars, if we're doing that right, we set aside enough for 2 cars, we buy 2 cars. It's not like we're buying, the goal is not to buy 4 in 2024. It's always to have 2 new ones every year, just so that we keep current with what they have. I mean, it doesn't take long for them to put a bunch of miles on a car and they never even leave town. And for every mile they put on, that car sits and idles. And that's a whole nother issue that, a lot of times we don't look at what the mileage is on the car. We look at the hours on the car, and like you would a diesel. And that's the number that we're really looking at for the life expectancy of the car, because what we know is if we take those hours and do it, assuming that the car is averaging 25 miles an hour and it's driving, that, we then determine actually how many miles that actually is. And a lot of times the odometer says 60, but the car's got like 100,000 miles worth of running on it. And so that's what we watch.
So one last question, do you, included in these numbers, now let me ask it as a question. How do you include the sale value of the depreciated cars when you're preparing this budget? I know it's a de minimis number, but it could be $40,000 a year of disposal.
Well, actually, this year's a good example. It probably is close to $40,000.
Yeah, I was actually going to touch on that on the
Okay.
report. I believe that the overall plan this year is to use the sales of the asset to probably purchase a new vehicle from all the vehicles that we've actually sold. So after we get the money, recoup the money, we will go back and ask the supervisors for permission to spend the money that we got in.
Ultimately, what would happen is that, ultimately what should be happening is if we're depreciating right, we know there's a value at the end of the sale or at the end of the life. And so we depreciate a police car over 5 years, typically is what we think it's going to last. And so we do that. We know at the end, we buy it for 55. We know at the end, we're probably going to sell it for about 3. And so we take that and then we would apply that hopefully to offset as we go forward some of the increase in cost of that vehicle. It would be ultimately where we're headed. We just haven't gotten there totally yet, but that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. So that concludes the budget presentation. And I guess our shot to get through that in about 15, 20 minutes was shot. But
Can I just add, so I think Ed kind of alluded to this too, but maybe putting a summary schedule in Excel or something to show all those components and the items that Larry mentioned too, just as a summary, and then you have all the details behind it.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, might help make it quicker,
Yeah.
the presentation too.
Well, no, especially with the volume of information those guys have to take in, it's just simple.
yeah, and like I said, we're going to need to combine this one with our operating. And if this group just took an hour, I'm sure the supervisors may not have as many questions the first go around, but
Chins will be hitting the desk.
yeah, I'm not trying to bore them to death. I'm trying to give them the
And we
information.
don't care about political issues. That's that simple.
No.
So I thank everybody for the feedback on that. We'll try to work that into our presentation when we get to the supervisors at the next meeting.
Oh, and I would also put in what is covered by an outside
Yep.
funding source.
Yep.
don't know if that was
Yeah,
said.
break it out so they see it. So now, instead of being the esteemed Mr. Lafayette, we'll go to the leader of the three-time award-winning finance function here in Newtown Township, Rich Lafayette, to provide us with an overview of the reports.
We've been one of the nicest introductions I've ever.
Hey, you know what? I work weddings too.
So for sake of time, I'm just gonna go through and.
He might be looking back in the future, so.
This is being recorded. So just to hit on some major highlights, just for time's sake, because I know that there's one other agenda item. Overall, our revenues are down 151,000 in comparison to June in 2021. Likewise, our expenses are down 497,000 in comparison. So at the end of the day, the township's roughly ahead about 364,000.
So you're down in June or cumulatively you're down?
We're down cumulatively to this point in time, year to date. So some of the things that are affecting our revenues is you'll see approximately about $570,000 more in collections in June. Second, it's gonna pull the right report up. Yep, $570,000 more in collections in June than compared to 2021. Year to date, I'm sorry. There's still $192,000 to collect in the general fund compared to $238,000 year to date last year. So we're actually ahead in collections of where we were. If you add the 192, like I've said last month, to what is currently collected, we're right on track to hit our budget number, if not possibly a little bit ahead, knowing that we usually lean between $40,000 and $60,000 every year. Another large decrease you're going to see is in our other taxes. LST is showing a slight increase of about $4,500, but real estate transfer tax is showing a large decrease. And this is to do with the transfer of the mainline health building. That transferred for about $317,000. So that equates to about 89% of the decrease that we're seeing in that category. And the last major variance you're going to see is public safety. Public safety is down about $430,000. This is directly correlated with our permit revenues. There's about a $522,000 permit that was pulled in early 2021 for the development of the Ellis Preserve that was not pulled this year. So that's one-time revenue. So you'll see a large decrease in our public safety for that reason. Moving on to our expenses, you're going to see, I guess we'll call it three major variances. The first is going to be salaries, benefits, and personnel are down in total $206,000. Although you'll see an increase in salary and personnel of about $108,000, it's offset by a $315,000 decrease in benefits. This is for two reasons. The first and the bigger contributor is our decrease in our MMOs, our minimum municipal obligation for our pensions. This one, because we are very well funded and we dropped our assumed interest rates down to about 6.5%, not assumed interest rate, our rate of return down to about 6.5%. Our MMOs greatly decreased for the years 2022 and 2023. We'll get our next evaluation at the end of 2023 for our 2024, but that is the large decrease you're going to see in the benefits.
We anticipate that's going to go back up with
Yep.
the wonderful way the stock market.
Yeah.
And do we expect in the next budget, I mean, we're gonna have a higher salaries and wages because of inflation, wage inflation is really, and cost of living is going up and all that. We're accounting for that in our budget to help our staff, yes?
So we are in the police contract is set. So their amount is set by contract. And so it's in there. We have in the past budgeted for our staff to always get whatever the cost of living is. We did not do that this year because the number was so high. I mean, at 9%, we didn't necessarily think that the board would approve a 9% increase.
That's when it's most needed,
Yeah,
right?
I don't disagree. And that's why if we, in my opinion, I would like to see us doing something a little more consistent as we go along than doing, than doing this, because, some years, obviously, we did almost nothing. And then, I don't disagree with you, but a 9% increase, I don't know how we would fund it. I mean, I really don't. That's the thing that we're having to look at. I think we put in a 5.
Yes.
We put in a 5. But I mean, I hear what you're saying, but, we were trying to figure out how to, that number itself is so big. I don't know how we're going to look at how we're going to.
Because I just remember at a meeting some months ago, you said, oh, I can't find anyone to do the janitor job. And I
It is a
remember thinking,
problem.
you can't find anyone to do the janitor job at the price you want to pay them, but you can find people to do them. You pay them enough, I'll do it. And my point is, we need to, as a township, and I know this is a board of supervisors, I wish we'd have put the 9% in there and let them vote that down.
We can do that. I mean, if that's what you would like to see us do as a group, we'll go back and say, this is what we're doing. I mean, I think we were looking at, if I remember right, was it close to 100,000?
With the new ads and everything.
No, was it
Oh.
at a 5%?
For the police, it was 100,000. For the police, I believe it was about another 90,000 so it was $200,000 in salary increases just based on the police contract, and then the 4.5 or 5% that we put in for staff.
Yeah, see, the interesting thing's gonna be, right? So we've all seen inflation hit in different parts, but municipal budgets haven't hit yet because it's not in that cycle. So to your point, right? Then it becomes a political will issue. So will the taxpayer say, I understand why my taxes are going up because look at the cost of everything else that's going up? Or will it be a comment of, oh crap, something else I'm getting hit with inflation? But we're running a business here and you have to retain these folks.
Sure.
Right? And there's no law that says policemen have to stay in the town. If they get an offer for $30,000 more to go to the next town over, I can understand why they would take that offer. So we need to be realistic about that
And some have.
Exactly. Or they get promoted, they get another opportunity. But I guess where I'm going with this is we need to be realistic enough about it and say to the supervisors, we need to make sure our people are taken care of because the great resignation can hit us as much as it did everybody.
Well said, I agree, 100%.
One of the things you may want to think about is to simplify it. You have 4 spending categories. You have internal labor, you have materials, you have third-party labor, and you have services. And when you want to try and budget, well, what is inflation going to be versus this year? By categorizing it that way, I think it's going to kind of present itself where if you're budgeting a 9% increase for materials and services, because that's what you're confronted with, step back and say, but internal labor should only be 5%, doesn't sell. It's obvious what you're doing, but it brings up that whole issue of equity and fairness as compared to what you're bound to pay to outsiders. This is what we're confronted with. What happened with the recycling contract? Putting it out that way and forcing the issue.
Good. I'm hearing you, and I'm sure the staff will appreciate that, and I'll be
Tell
glad
them
to
to
go
send
back
me
and
out
look at that.
Christmas cards.
Yes.
But
No, you did not.
I
because
can
it's-
see you're
it's
gonna get
more
s-
digestible.
it's going to get, the internal labor is going to get shortchanged in this.
Yeah,
And it's
and
just
it always
not
has.
right.
It always has.
It's not right.
And
And
I-
so when you want to present it like, okay, our third-party material costs are 9%. How do we justify internal labor being 4.5%?
Yeah, okay,
I think it's a good way to look at it. Good for you.
let's look at that.
Got it. Simon, I'll be all for it. So moving on. So that was what was going on with our salaries, benefits, and personnel costs. Some other things that I just wanted to touch on very quickly. You'll see a large decrease in our debt payments, as I talked about. I'll continue to talk about from month to month. Our 2020 road program was funded out of general fund in 2021. It was moved to liquid fuels after we paid our, I believe it was 2016 loan off. So that expense has moved from the general fund over to the liquid fuels. That's why you'll see a very large decrease in debt. And the last thing that I would like to hit on is the pension. You'll see a $196,000 decrease. Just like I just talked about, that's a pure MMO reduction in payment. There's no timing issues. That is just the reduction in our MMO payment year to date. So that would conclude the very brief year-to-date June report. If anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to get more.
Rich,
detail.
brevity is the soul of wit. Okay. Move over to old business. I unfortunately have a hard stop at 9:15, so I'm gonna head out in a moment. So move to old business, and who's the vice chair?
Me.
Okay, good. I will defer to you. In
Yes.
case of the demise of the chair, you can
Well,
continue the
I
meeting.
think this is
after
going
that.
to take about 30 seconds.
Okay, good.
We have continued to meet our subgroup and gather data. Lisa and I are in the process of assembling a written draft summary of our findings. I'll use that term very broadly. And with the goal being that we would want to route this through Rich, Steve, Rich Sokol. First, get kind of a vetted working draft that then can be presented to the finance committee. We're kind of setting a hard timeline for ourselves that we want to get this through us and to this committee so that it can be considered. You've got the hard copy in advance of the August Finance Committee meeting. So you've had time to digest it rather than us handing it out to you here. And so that way you can come prepared with ammunition, hand grenades, great suggestions. It can be properly vetted in this group so that once we finalize a recommendation by the Finance Committee to the Board of Supervisors, that could be done after the August meeting.
That's a good plan.
All right?
Anybody else on?
Did I make it?
You did an outstanding job. You keep me on my calendar. All right, any other questions on old business? Public comment here online?
Crickets.
Nothing from future, weddings or anything like that? Nobody caught up there? All right, items for the next agenda?
Turn on my mic this time, Rich. Could we do a review, if not next month, in the future, of all the real estate that's owned by the township? Just where it is, what it is, and just so we're aware of real estate owned, because we've talked here about several different parcels, but I don't personally know where all the real estate is that we own. The
So
second,
let me just ask a question. Even if it's something that we're not using as a park or anything, you'd like to know where we have it, what it is,
yep.
to make sure I understand. Okay.
And the second thing is, do you have a sense for how many grants we currently have in process with various municipalities and foundations? Grant applications, and you mentioned, we're buying X, but part of that is covered by a grant. Do we keep track of grants that we've applied for?
We keep track of grants that are applied for and awarded.
Yeah.
We can do that for you.
Yeah, I believe I have a very rough list. I would just have to go through and polish it up a bit, but that I do have a list.
Thank you.
Any other items for next agenda?